But especially with narcissistic abuse, there's this disconnection. They somehow get between you and your own identity. I guess because, again, think of the myth Narcissus, like he needed something to reflect him. And so to a narcissist, that's all you are, is a mirror.
Yeah.
And so they really do, there's different varying degrees of this. My mom just happened to be super extreme, but they want to cut you off from anything that is not a reflection of them. And if you reflect anything that they don't like, then that's a threat.
Hello, and welcome back to Journey of a Fearless Female. I'm your host, Paola Rosser, and this week my guest is Kyra Finley. She is a writer, a poet, a mystic, an astrologer, and an artist who desires to create art and experiences for those she touches that will alchemize the pain of their past into the promise of their future. She's a survivor, a thriver of extended trauma who believes that healing and integration are not only possible, but inevitable if you're willing to go into the pain and open your hearts to loving all of life, even the parts we wish weren't there. She's been on a lifelong journey of liberation, self-discovery, and freedom, and she's excited to be able to share the nuggets of wisdom she's learned along the way with the tools and the modalities that have helped her get through some of the darkest days. Everybody, please welcome Kyra. So I gotta tell you, oh my gosh, I met her at the Goddess event in Los Angeles. Oh my gosh, there was just something about her energy that called me to her. She was sitting there eating her lunch and I was like, I'm sorry to interrupt. And she's like, no. And I sat there. She did a gene codes things, which we're going to talk about on this podcast. But just being able to sit there. I mean, I had just met this woman and I'm like telling her my whole life story, crying my eyes out. We're hugging at the end. And I'm just like, I have to have you on my podcast. So it is such an honor to have you here. So tell us about your journey as a fearless female. Let's go back to the beginning.
The beginning. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that beautiful welcome. I'm so glad that we met that day and I'm thrilled to be here. The beginning.
I
So,
know.
yeah, I guess the beginning is really, I was born into a broken family, essentially. Um, my mom, this was like her fourth marriage. This was my dad's second marriage. They had essentially already split up by the time I got there. And that was mostly due to the fact that my mom, mic drop moment, is really highly narcissistic. There's a scale and she's like over here. According to my counselors, and like I didn't make that determination, but from what I've been told, it's like, wow. And she had really, just like my dad had really done that for 17 years with his first marriage, and he was like, I'm not doing it again. And my sisters, like I have three older sisters, my mom had three other children, and they all ran away from home when I was a baby. So the essential thing of that is that it was really just me and her my whole life. And so I'm growing up as this like super light, and not to make myself all the good guy here, because I definitely had my moments, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
But I just was this like totally loving and accepting being, as we all are.
When you're a child, that's who we are.
It's how we all come in, and we believe those around us, right? And so I just bought everything that was being told to me. And so, yeah, I guess this is relevant to share, kind of vulnerable, but I was
This
also,
is a safe space. So
yeah, yeah. I was also sexually abused when I was really, really tiny. And in later years, and also my mom was involved. So I was, I got this memory back about 7 or 8 years ago. So I'm guessing I was like between 1 and 2, somewhere around it.
Oh.
And don't exactly know who it was, but I just have this memory, very visceral, of her and this person and being terrified out of my mind. And that was a very deep imprint, because during the memory, she was shushing me and like quite angry with me for crying. And in my healing journey since then, I've come to recognize like what a deep imprint that has been on my voice and expressing my needs. And, like everything that was happening in that moment was I was trying to vocalize like, yo, this is not okay. Boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
so there was this really early, really deep imprint of terror around all of that. And yeah, fast forward, there was like this epic custody battle between my mom and my dad because he really did try. And she manipulated me and turned me against him and had me like literally attacking him verbally, of course, not physically.
Yeah.
Uh, and I learned recently that this actually is a thing. I can't remember the technical term for it, but it's a thing.
Isn't it
Like,
parental alienation, I think it's called?
yes, yes. I've watched up on that and I was like, oh, that's exactly what happened. So
Yeah.
again, what I've learned about that technique is when one parent is so intentionally alienating you from another parent, it has this like massive impact on the child because you're being forced to deny half of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it creates this like, and that was definitely my lived experience of like, it created, first of all, this like existential terror that I never could get away from because if I wasn't successful in pushing him away, if I had any fun with him, or if I had any kind of like relationship with my dad, if I even allowed myself to call him my dad, then I would get rejected when I got home,
Mm.
get punished. I would get the silent treatment. I would be sent to my room or sometimes denied food. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
How old was your mom when she had you?
she was 38.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So it's not like she was young and, like, and didn't know
No.
any better. She's 38 years old is pretty, you should be consciously aware by then. But obviously did she suffer her own trauma to get her to the place where she was that narcissistic?
The interesting thing about my mom is we're not speaking now. It's
Hmm.
just the safest thing for everybody. But up to the point that we weren't speaking, she never has been able to admit
Mm,
anything. I've put some pieces together, and I do believe that she definitely suffered her own version of narcissistic trauma. I'm guessing there was also some sexual abuse there.
mm,
Um, but this is all just my gut instinct. Like if you asked her, she would tell you that she grew up in a normal home. But once I got out, which we'll get to that later, but once I got out, I started asking around and I started getting a different story.
mm.
So short answer is I believe, very much I believe so. She's
Yeah.
just not in a place to be working on it right now.
Yeah. And then some people actually become aware of their narcissistic tendencies and do the work and can heal from that. But there are a lot of walking wounded that
Mhm.
just never look inward and are constantly blaming and shaming and pointing the fingers of like everyone else is the problem except for me. And
Mhm.
so the reason why me and her resonated so well is because I have the same type of mother figure who it's like it's everybody else and not her. And she'll never ever like look inward and say, hey, maybe I did have a part of her trauma or her emotional despair. She'll never, it's always me. I'm the problem.
Yeah, totally. And my mom, like I found out later, she probably is also sociopathic.
Mm,
Just according to my counselors, I can't make that diagnosis, but it does give you the lens of like, from what I understand, they really create this like wall and
mhm.
they like section parts off.
Yeah.
And that again has to come from a very deep wound. You don't do that unless something really bad happened.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because you have to disassociate and compartmentalize the trauma, the abuse, and
mhm.
you basically disassociate to the point where you don't even know what's right or wrong or what's good or bad, or you don't have that emotional intelligence because it's been basically traumatized out of you.
Yeah,
You no longer can have that same empathy for other people if no one's having empathy for you.
totally. And I did watch it progress too. I think that's the other thing that's interesting to note is my mom was able to be more of a normal mom when I was younger. I mean, I always say that. Maybe it's just that I had no clue. I mean,
Yeah.
not feeding your 5-year-old is not normal,
Yeah.
but she was more able to keep up appearances at least on the external. And then as I got older, it is so true. She became very much a hermit and just not able to really function. And
Mm.
so it's incredibly sad. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know at one point you decided it's time to separate from your mom because she was your whole world. Like you said, you didn't have siblings, you didn't have your dad. And so she kind of isolated you, which is a big, huge number one narcissistic flag is to isolate the victim. And it can be your parent. It doesn't always necessarily be a significant other. It could also be your parent, where, like you said earlier, they can alienate you from your other parent and make you feel that that person is the enemy, which causes a whole nother set of, like you said, more trauma, more pain, more emotional damage.
Hmm.
And that happens all the time, especially in divorce situations. I was just listening to Bethany Frankel's podcast, Divorce 101, and she said that happens all the time,
Yeah.
where one of the parent hates the other so much so that they don't even care what happens to the child. It's like collateral damage, and they don't even care. They hate the significant X, so much that they're willing to sacrifice the child
Hmm.
and want to bring that X so much pain. And if it's like sacrificing the child, then I'm going to use the child as a weapon, which is disgusting. And it's sad because there's so many, and it's just perpetuating the problem because now that child is walking around with all this trauma, all this pain, doesn't know how to self-regulate, and is part of the walking wounded society.
Yeah, totally. And not to mention the collateral damage on the father or the
Oh
whoever
yeah.
so my dad and I eventually after 5 years, he gave full custody to my mom because he just realized he was never going to get through the barrier.
Mm,
And after that point, I think I saw him twice, but essentially there was 25 years where we
mm.
didn't talk. And when we did finally reconnect, he had actually stopped telling people that he had a fourth child. He
Oh,
did so much. And of course that kind of hurt, but also I recognized,
his own
wow,
hurt.
he had to totally cut that off because it just wounded him so much.
Yeah.
Um,
And some states don't give the fathers that much power over their own child. They give all the power to the mom, and they don't consider how it is super important for us to have both parents. It's super
totally.
important to have the masculine and the feminine energy in your life.
Mhm.
And it's sad when, the masculine energy is cut off from you or the feminine energy is cut off from you. It's important. And so, yeah, it's damaging for the father. I mean, I'm sure he carried so much shame and guilt and maybe felt like there were so many things he could have done and didn't do. And so, yeah, I could totally understand that point of view.
Yeah, yeah. And amazingly, well, I feel like I'm jumping the gun, but we did reconnect and I had 7 years with him before he passed away about 2 years ago.
Mm.
But we had 7 years together and it was truly just beautiful. We had some really hard conversations
Yeah, I'm sure.
because I was going on my healing journey and I was asking him questions and there was this huge abandonment wound in me, despite the fact that he fought for 5 years.
Yeah,
There was this piece of me that was like, yeah, but you left me with her. like
I
like
know.
when you originally left, why didn't you kidnap me, um and we had to have those talks and he was very reactive about it at first, but we worked through it. It was one of the most beautiful relationships in my life from the standpoint that we kept coming back together. And because we had been apart for so long, there was such an honor and such a devotion to continuing. So yeah, so
Oh,
that came full
I'm
circle.
glad you got those years with him and able to like close the loop on that, especially for him too, to be able to pass away knowing that he has a relationship with you and that loop is closed.
Yeah, yeah, it continues to be one of the most beautiful blessings in all of this for me.
Okay, so let's go back to the relationship with your mother. At what point in your life did you realize there's something different about my mom compared to someone else's mom?
Well, this is where my story gets kind of, I guess, interesting. The honest answer to that is I think I started to sense things when I was about, I'm going to say 14, 16 years old. a lot of that had to do with one of my sisters did move back home for a little while, and she had been out in the world.
Mhm.
She had lived in New York and done all this amazing stuff, and she came home and lived with us for a while. And we used to take walks, and she was the first one that ever, thank God, I love you, Karen. Um, she was the first one that kind of ever pointed out my mom's behavior
Mm.
and may have even used the word narcissistic, you know? And so that started planting questions in me, but I was still so tightly wound to my mom. I remember like laying in bed with her cuddling, which that was a whole other thing. Physical contact was, my mom used her kids for affection and for physical touch. And I later learned that that in itself is a form of sexual abuse because it was like forced.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other, like so many years of that is a layer.
Mhm.
But I remember laying in bed and she kind of like pulled this confession out of me about what we've been talking about on our walks. And so then I like, kind of went back to her side for a while. And then, yeah, I mean, the short answer is it wasn't until I was 34.
Mm.
So fast forward, I was homeschooled through high school, more isolation. I wasn't allowed to date. She was going to pick my husband.
Wow.
I guess I should mention I grew up in the church.
Mhm.
So I had a genuine connection with Jesus when I was 3 and came home from preschool talking about Jesus and God, and I still like, even though I'm not in the church, I still very much resonate with Christ consciousness, and Yeshua is like, he's a beautiful, beautiful guide.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, literally like my best friend for 30 years. But my mom, again, took that as a way to control me. And so we grew up in this church, and she managed to find, purity culture was a big thing in the church in the 90s,
Mhm.
but she managed to find like the most extreme version. And so, yeah, she really like kind of arm twisted me into agreeing to her picking my husband, not dating, like not nothing. I wasn't allowed to socialize. I couldn't go to birthday parties without her. Um, because there was this rule that if we couldn't both go to something, then neither one of us would go to it.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to take my mom to a 14-year-old birthday party. Like, it's just weird.
Yeah.
And, I was remembering the other day, like wanting to join, because I'm fully bought into the purity culture thing at this point. So I wanted to join this like True Love Waits group. But she even talked me out of that and told me how it was a cover for dating. And, she talked me out of going to college. And so
Wow.
essentially, like, up until 34, like I was working to take care of her. She'd racked up a lot of credit card debt. And she was still working up until a certain point, but
Mhm.
I just like was working jobs, and I would say 20 to 34 was just like a lot of survival. We did manage to start a catering business somewhere in there. And so we were both working for this very large church, and they wanted like new caterers for their events. And so I just was like, okay, we'll do it. And it started this whole thing. So we did that for like 9 years. I mean, there's so much other stuff in there.
Like, were there people in your like vicinity, your realm, other than your sister, that may have mentioned something to you, like this is a little bit codependent, or your mom's a little bit kind of like, overly protective, or did anyone ever make comments like that, maybe in your church or in the catering business? No one ever did. Everyone just from the outside think you guys were just like two peas in a pod, and and were people telling you like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a mom like that? Is that what it was like?
Yes, that's exactly what it was like. I was so good at holding the company line,
Mm,
to the point that even though, and this is a really interesting dynamic of being in an abusive relationship, and not one that I necessarily think I completely understand yet, but there's something that happens where I guess for survival, you really do take on their belief system. I look back at certain memories where she was telling me like what I was going to do for the rest of my life. There's one where God had given her a prophecy, and she was telling me what my career was going to be, and and it all had to do with, so my sister had just committed suicide.
Mm.
from drug, essentially from drug addiction that she'd had her whole life for, again, obvious reasons. Because my mom was like this with all of her kids. It's just I was the only one that she managed to keep so isolated.
Yeah.
But she had just passed away, and I think out of pain, my mom was like, "Okay, you're gonna start a halfway house for drug addicts, you and your husband, who, like, we don't know where he is." At this point, I'm, like, 22 years old, and she's never let me near a man. So it's like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Um, but I remember sitting on the floor and her telling me all of this, of, like, all this stuff that God had said about the rest of my life, and I'm taking it in, like, I think it has to be true because she's saying, like, but
Yeah.
but internally, I have this visceral memory of what my gut was doing, and it was twisting, and, like, I felt nauseous and hot all over, and so my body was trying to give me all these clues this whole time, but I had so shut off from myself.
Yeah.
And so anyway, back to, like, the point that you were making, I just became really good at holding that line and playing the part and acting like I didn't want any of these things. And later when I got out, some of the, like, friends that I had, because I had a few friends when I just through work. Like,
Mhm.
that was really the only place that I could get any kind of friend. But they said to me later, like, after I left, they were like, "We always thought it was weird, but you seemed happy." Like,
You're like, "Yeah, because I had a mask on and I was putting up a front."
yeah,
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was insane.
People who have never been in a narcissistic relationship, whether it's a parent or a lover or partner or even a freaking boss, like
Mhm.
they are such good groomers and manipulators that they do have you believing what they're telling you.
Yeah.
To the point, even though your body, like you said, was having a visceral reaction of like, this is wrong, get away, move, run for your life.
Mhm.
Your brain has been so programmed to believe exactly whatever it is that the ideology of whatever it is they're trying to pour over you, that you're
Yeah.
so stuck. And you're also afraid, what if she is right? What if he is right? What if they are right? I mean, religion has a great way of doing this to people all the time. You have a visceral reaction to what the pastor is saying, but you're like, but what if he is right? What if I don't do this and I go to hell? And so you're just kind of stuck in this place of like, I have to follow these rules. I have to, I have to, I have to. When in reality, they're just pouring their own fears, their own doubt, their own shame, their own guilt all over you.
Yeah, well, that's really what narcissism is. There's two things that come up while you say that. One, that's what narcissism is they're projecting all of the anxiety and fear and shame and guilt and everything that lives on the inside of them onto you, which leads to my second point. In reflection, I believe the reason that she was able to keep that control for so long was that she had so completely convinced me that I needed to be fixed,
Mm,
that there was something wrong with me. Now, of course, we know in the spiritual world, if that wasn't already in my subconscious, like if that wasn't already a wound that I came to heal, she wouldn't have been able to hit me with that bullet.
yeah.
So I'm not, like, I have to take my part of that because obviously I came with that predisposition. But that was what I heard every time that something went wrong in our life. It was like, well, and the scriptures, for some reason, she kept saying that, like, I could make this ultimate decision to honor her. And that if I made this ultimate decision, then everything else in our life would just like pan out perfectly. And so
Yeah.
I spent years trying to figure out how to make that decision.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
getting sent to my room to pray about why I did something wrong or what was wrong with me. And I would come out and tell her what I heard because I did have a connection with the divine. And I did hear stuff like I've had encounters since I was a kid, but I got talked out of all of them.
Mm,
And so I would come out and say something and she'd be like, "No, you're not hearing from God on that." And then she would just, like you said, like there's this magical ability to take, because the more information you give a narcissist, the more they have to play with.
yeah.
If
When
you
you're isolated, you have no one to say, "Hey, does this make sense?" Or what do you think about this? You have no one to be their sounding board. So
Well,
that's why the number one thing they do is to isolate you. They take you away from your friends. They take away from your family. They take away, even like you were saying, even you were a part of the church that she wanted you to be a part of. She wouldn't let you go to certain Bible studies or certain group activities because she knew that if she allowed you to go over there, you'd have a whole different perspective. You would have people you would be able to talk to. And she was like, no, I can't control the information that you're going to get. So I have to keep you isolated so that I'm the only one giving you instructions. I'm the only one pouring into you and no one else is.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. And I mean, I literally got beaten as a child for telling people certain information. So like it's ingrained at such an early, or for me it was at least ingrained at such an early age. Like you don't tell people our business.
Mhm.
But to your point, like most of those conversations would happen naturally. Like you just naturally tell your friends, oh, my mom said this, you
Mhm.
know, and they'd be like, what? You know, but I didn't have that until I guess this is a good time to segue to. So I was about 32 years old. I'm working in an animal. We had quit the church. She actually got fired, but then I left and we were just doing the catering business. But that wasn't bringing in enough. So I started working at an animal hospital and like to just bring in some consistent income. So I met a guy. Like the short story is there was this man that came to work as one of the receptionists there. And again, I'm like 32 years old. I've never dated. I'm like not getting out of the house, you know? And it was just like, I, the moment I met him, I was like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
And I hadn't felt that way about anybody in a really long time. Like, of course I had had crushes and that kind of thing, but just never encouraged in them, never able to do anything about them. So for whatever reason, and I was mystifying myself while I was doing this because
Mhm.
from all appearances, he was a punk and not a Christian. But I was like, I'm just so drawn to this person. And so I just started trying to like build a relationship and, taking advantage of the time that I was at work. And he left to go work at a church. And I was like, wait, what? So all of a sudden I'm like, okay, maybe this is a possibility. And I was telling my mom about that afternoon. Like I had just found out and I was telling her and she goes, do you think he might be the one? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm curious, you
Yeah.
know? And she was like, well, don't do anything about it. If it's God, it'll happen. And, just don't do anything about it. And I'm like, cool. So I ended up asking him to work like part-time in our catering business. And my mom agreed, but it was driving her nuts because I would go to catering jobs and I would come home and I'd be all excited because we had a good time. And he's like so flirtatious and that's so fun. And
Yeah.
I mean, come to find out, he was just flirtatious. But
But either
um,
way, it probably really got under your mom's skin.
oh, you have no idea. Like it annoyed the hell out of her. And so I don't know, about like 2 months into this, we're standing in the kitchen and she goes, I prayed about him and God said he's not the one. And again, that visceral like gut reaction.
Yeah.
And it just like I felt so sick. And this was the first time in a really long time because he was a good friend. He would text
Mhm.
me funny things and this was the first time that I had any kind of emotional connection with somebody. And just that alone felt like such a lifeline.
Yeah.
So anyway, like it was just about a year of like confusing as fuck, pardon my French. Is it okay?
Yes, it's okay to cuss.
Because she'd be like, hire him for this job. And then I would get home and she'd be like, so pissed off,
Mm.
and like play all kinds of games and, not do things that she said she was going to do for the business. And it eventually became this very, very manipulative situation where it was like she was pressing me. The way I like to tell it is like, for whatever reason, this was the hill I chose to die on, because for some reason I was finally like, you know what? I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that he's the one, but I'm not going to say that he's not. And I really want to continue building this friendship. And it drove her nuts.
Yeah,
Like,
well, she's had control over you for 30 plus years. And you're
yeah,
finally like standing up for yourself and saying, I'm not going to listen to you. And of course, it's going to be like, what? You picture her head just spinning around, like the
yeah,
exorcist, like,
green
what?
stuff coming out of it.
Right?
And I mean, it like just really irrational behavior. We'd be in the middle of a catering job. And, when you're doing catering, like you got it down to the minute and you got to keep working to get out the kitchen, and get everything to the client on time. And she would start these like discussions about him in the middle of this.
Mm,
And then when I wouldn't agree with her, she'd just quit and go sit down and like refuse to work. And I don't have time to call anybody else in. Like, and so
yeah.
I would stop what I was doing and I would go sit down and I would talk to her and I would like be like, okay, fine, fine. And I
Like a
found myself,
toddler.
yeah, found myself having to say things that I didn't believe. And for the first time, it was really bothering me. Also, I was getting to know his family, to what you said earlier. His family was really sweet. They invited me over for dinner. Of course, I couldn't go because she didn't want to go, and so I never went.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, like I was getting to know them. His sister was really sweet. She invited me over. This is a fun story. She invited me over for like a advocare meeting or something, which is like a multi-level marketing thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, chance to get out of the house? Yes, and to get to know his family and so on and so forth. And so I was like, I want to go. And this was one of those times where like my mom was like, well, pray about it and see what God says. And I was like, yeah, I'm feeling like going. And she's like, and she just shut down on me and punished me for like the next week.
Mm.
And, just in all kinds of different ways. But anyway, over the course of about a year, it got more and more dramatic till eventually she literally said, it's him or me.
Wow.
And if you don't cut off this relationship, like I'm moving to New Jersey to live with your sister, which by the way, my sister was like, that would never have happened. Um,
You're all, but here's your plane ticket and here's the bags. Bye.
right. Right. And I should have again, like, but this is the fascinating part. Like you would think there would be this part of me that'd be like, freedom, yes,
Yeah.
New Jersey. But she had so convinced me that I was helpless without her.
Mm.
We had these like massive catering jobs on the books and all of this stuff coming at us. I was $40,000 in credit card debt that she ran up on my credit cards. We had a mortgage and like all of this stuff. And I'm like, if you leave, like half the catering labor leaves, like I
Yeah.
can't afford that. And so it became this like probably about a month of just like escalate, escalate, escalate. There was one night where I came home and I told her that I had texted him. And I like a confession and to a priest. I was like, I know I'm not supposed to communicate with him, but I did. And turns out he actually like just lost his dog. And I was wondering if maybe we could like send a message to his dad because his dad's really, really upset about it. And she literally was like, you're not my daughter. I don't know who you are. She walked into the kitchen, started making scrambled eggs, and at some point threw them across the kitchen.
What? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
This is like the mildest stuff my mom has done. We haven't even
Yeah.
gotten
Oh my
that's a
gosh.
whole other thing. Um, and then yelled at me when I like bent down to pick them up for her. And
Mm-hmm.
later that night came in with a plate of it, like hid the plate of eggs behind the door and was like, are you hungry? And I was like, no. And she pulls out the plate of eggs and she's like, okay, that's fine. And she walks off and I'm like, and that was probably the start because I went into work the next day and I talked to somebody that night. Was so off the wall. And so I went into work the next day and I talked to somebody. She basically told me the Christian line to honor my mother, but then she,
Mm.
I know, like we're in Texas
Oh,
at this
I know.
point.
For those who
So
aren't watching on YouTube, I just rolled my eyes and literally. Oh, I hate when people say that.
I know. She's
Honor
like,
thy
she's the head
mother
of
and
your household.
father.
Yeah, she's
I'm
the
like,
head of
but
your
do you
household.
know my
Right? Exactly. Yeah. But thank God she went home and talked to, thank God that I have a different take on that. But anyway, she went home and talked to her husband.
mother? Hmm.
And for whatever reason, her husband was like, thank God for Will J. Cox. He was expanded enough to say, this is, how old is she? you know?
This is not normal.
Yeah. And so he asked her if I would talk to him. And so Colleen comes in the next day and she's like, hey, will you talk to Will? I'm like, yes. And again, I had to like lie and say I was grocery shopping
Mm,
to get out of the house. I meet him in a Walmart in like one of those like McDonald's that's inside the Walmart. I tell him like 5 minutes and he just like, he's like,
yeah.
this is manipulation and control. This is abuse. What she's telling you is honor is not honor. Like, and he just gave me this whole reframe. And I literally walked away. And again, like so much control. We were 15 minutes into the meeting and my mom's calling me. So we had to cut it
Mm,
short. But I get in the car and I texted Colleen and I was like, my whole life makes sense. I've been thinking I was the problem this whole time.
yeah.
And I'm trying to fix it and fix it and fix it and fix it and fix me. Like if I can just fix me, then she'll love me.
Mm,
And all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, it's not actually me.
yeah. There's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah. I don't know if I got that far yet, but
Yeah, but I'm sure you now have gotten to that part, but it takes a long time to untether years and years of abuse and trauma. I mean, you got all the way into your 30s. I left when I was in my teens, early 20s. But yeah, and even then it takes so many more years of healing and reprogramming your brain, and because you second guess, like, wait, am I wrong or am I right? Or and you're just constantly second guessing yourself. Oh, I can't even imagine, because you went clear into your 30s with the abuser.
yeah. Yeah. 34 years of nonstop. And that's something that I'm almost 10 years from that. And that's something that I keep coming back to is like, wow, the extent. And I would say that the biggest wound that I see consistently, regardless of how long it's happened, is the trusting yourself,
Mm,
like, and the forgiving yourself for buying it, for staying,
yeah.
for, but especially with narcissistic abuse, there's this disconnection. They somehow get between you and your own identity. I guess because again, think of the myth narcissist, like he needed something to reflect him. And so to a narcissist, that's all you are, is a
Mm,
mirror.
yeah.
And so they really do, there's different varying degrees of this. My mom just happened to be super extreme, but they want to cut you off from anything that is not a reflection of them. And if you reflect anything that they don't like, then that's a threat.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm still working on it, if I'm honest,
Yeah.
it's something that I
So
constantly.
tell us about the day you decided to separate yourself from your mom and how that went, and then like talk a little bit about your journey to the healing process of really letting go of all of that.
Yeah. So the day that I decided to go was probably like 2 or 3 weeks after Will and I started talking. I would like call him. I'd get in the car. We'd have this big thing and I'd get in the car and I'd call him. I'd be like, she said this. What's the truth? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like helping me reprogram. And I just remember taking this walk. I don't remember what came just before it, but I was taking this walk and I was talking to God, angels, like whoever. I would have said God at that point, and I just heard very distinctly, you need to leave because she needs to learn to rely on me.
Mm.
I know. Perfect thing to say to a codependent. Because I've learned in reflection, seriously, if God had said you need to leave because you need to learn to rely on me, I would have tried to figure out a way to do that there.
Mm-hmm.
Because this feels pertinent to share. I think the biggest thing one of the biggest lessons that I've had is that there really was this wounded healer on the inside of me, that despite all of the machinations and everything that was going on, I really was subconsciously trying to heal my mom.
Mm.
And there was this devotion to like, if I can just get this right, then you'll be okay, which of course is somewhat selfish because then that means she'll meet my needs too.
Yeah.
But there was this real like sacrifice vibe in what I was doing. And So for God to so clearly tell me that this is better for her, it literally was because she threw a fit. I mean, she was quite calm when I first told her, but then about like a day later, the manipulation and the threats and the, I again, there was that $40,000 worth of credit card debt that I was like, I don't feel like I should be laid with all of this, you know? So we were doing a lot of bargaining with that. But anyway, like I heard that voice and then I told her about 2 or 3 days later, I'm moving out. I'm giving you the catering business. I'm signing over the house to you. Like the house was in my name, the car was in my name, everything was in my name. And I was like, we'll trade in a car. I'll get you a car, like the whole deal. I'm going to go get my own place. I'm going to get a job somewhere and
I'm
we can
leaving.
still have a relationship, but it's just going to be different. And again, like over the course of about a month, like I would wake up with her at the end of my bed, watching me sleep,
Oh my gosh.
tears in her eyes, saying, please don't let them separate us.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, like she wasn't giving up. She would follow me around the house. She would make me late for work. But this thing that God had told me that it was better for her was literally the thing that like kept me like, no, I'm going.
Yeah.
So it was hard. She actually ended up kicking me out and I ended up staying with the couple that helped me for about 9 months to get my back on my feet. Got a job at another church and really just like dove into everything I could possibly dive into, choir and like all these different things because I'm free. All of a sudden I
Yeah.
can get to coffee with a friend and like that's like amazing.
Yeah.
And that time period lasted, I would say, about 3 or 4 years. And I was doing some healing then. Even like the church that I was working for had an abuse recovery program. They were actually really emotionally intelligent. And one of the only churches around that was actually like recognizing that like the emotions matter.
Yeah.
So that was a deeply transformative time. It was really hard. I didn't realize how addicted I was to her,
Yeah.
like that's a thing. And you really do, like when you're in that kind of trauma for that long, you get addicted to the drama. You get addicted to your nervous system is
Well,
so
that's all you know. You know what I mean? That's your normal. This is your comfort zone, knowing the toxic behavior. It's like, if I act a certain way, she's going to abuse me, but then she's going to apologize and we're going to be better. And then she's going to act a certain way, she's going to abuse me, she's going to apologize, and then we're going to be better. It's the pattern that you were used to. It wasn't that you were addicted, I wouldn't say. I would say that that's all you knew. And like people who grow up in that toxic environment, in the chaos, in the drama, like, for example, I grew up in that kind of environment. And even when I met my husband, I went to therapy for an entire year because I could not fathom the type of unconditional love that he was giving me, because the love that I was always given was conditional. And if
yeah.
I did a certain thing, I was ready for the retaliation. And when I didn't get retaliation from my husband, I was like, wait, what is this? Why aren't you doing this? Like, I don't get it. You're not playing the tit for tat. I don't understand this. And it was something that I had to get used to, unconditional love that I never received as a child. And
Yeah.
so I wouldn't blame yourself. It's just how you were programmed. It's just how we were programmed. This is the way it is. This is the way you do this. I do this. This is the game we play. But when you're no longer in the game, you're like, wait a minute, no one's playing this game with me. And so
Mhm.
you kind of were like, what's wrong? Like, I don't get it. I've always known this to be true. If I do A, then you have to come back with B, and then we play this game of C and D. But when it's not happening, we're like confused because you're like, wait a minute, nobody does this? This only happened at my house? Like you
Oh,
start to feel like a little left out, like a fish out of water.
totally. And what I saw myself do is I could recreate those circumstances.
Mm,
Even if the people that I was interacting with were actually healthy, internally, my lens, like I'm still seeing it through the lens. Like that's the thing that I think is really interesting is when you're so deeply programmed, you can still interface with the normal world through the same way that you did before.
Yeah, I still
That's a
do the
little
same thing.
hard.
Yeah. I still catch myself because my mom was very she liked to pin people against each other. She liked to play the jealousy game. She tried to be like a one-upper. I'm better than you in this place and that place. And then I'll hear myself saying the same thing to like my friends, people that I love. And I'm like, Paola, stop that. Like
Mhm.
in my
Mhm.
head, I have to tell myself in the dialogue that I'm talking about my friend in my head, stop that. It's
Yeah.
not, we're not playing that game anymore. We're
Mhm.
not playing the jealousy, pin each other against each other game anymore. Like, because my mom was very much like, I want to see who loves me the most, because there's seven of us. So she always
Mhm.
wanted to play like, who's my favorite daughter? Who's going to love me the most? Who do I put on a pedestal this week? And I just would do that all the time. Like in my mind, I would catch myself, Payla, we're not doing that game. We're
Yeah.
not playing that game anymore. Like you love your friends because you love your friends and you love them unconditionally, not because they're going to do something for you.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. That is so true. Yeah. And I've watched myself. I read something shortly after I left about how you can almost turn like there was this woman who married a amazing man. Her father was an alcoholic, and she had sworn, I'm never going to marry an alcoholic. And they get married in the first some odd years are great. And then all of a sudden her husband becomes an alcoholic.
Mm,
And her revelation in that though was like, I'm actually not, I can't say that she turned him into an alcoholic, but there's this expectation that we can put on people so that all we'll receive from them
yeah.
is is something twisted.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's just a really interesting dynamic to work with. But
Okay.
anyway,
So,
yeah,
what are some of the healing modalities that you used to get yourself to a place where you're just kind of like untethering your soul? Because you're deep in you're not going to church anymore, right? You're out of the church. So, I mean, because that's a whole nother healing journey within itself is having to untether your soul from the church and religion. Tell us something about about your soul's awakening, basically.
that happened about 2 years ago, actually. Um, it started, I would say it actually started when my dad passed away, which was December 31st of 2021, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he passed away and I was already like transitioning out of the church a little bit, but still finding my way. And I felt like super called to go to Ireland. And so I did. And I'm doing all this exploring and like trying to find out what the truth is. And I had really already given up the idea that Jesus was like the savior that everyone needs, but I didn't have another ideology at that point. And I just mentioned Ireland to say, like, I got there and I got on the land and like I just encountered a whole other realm
Mm,
that blew my boxes open, like the first day I was there, I went to the Hill of Tara and this beautiful friend of mine now, her name is Tracy. She took me there and she's like guiding me around and I'm talking to trees and I'm hearing the heartbeat of the earth and, and seeing these like crazy visions and and then going to cairns and like interacting with beings in the cairn and like and I'm like, y'all aren't Jesus, you know.
yeah.
Um, so it just cracked me open, just
Hmm.
massive expansion. And I came home and a friend, this is where Gene Keys comes in actually. So one of the friends that I met in Ireland had sent me a video of Richard Rudd talking about reincarnation. Because again, that's taboo in the church.
Yeah.
Being over there, I met this druid who was like, oh yeah, I was this guy in a past life. And I'm like, somehow I believe you, you know?
Mm, yeah.
Um, so I was curious. So my friend sent me this video and it's a series that Richard did about reincarnation and he sold me, he
Hmm.
was like, he basically said, if you do believe in God, how stingy would he be to just give you one life?
Yeah.
And that started me like, I just clicked from one thing to the next. And uh yeah, I'm so grateful for Gene Keys because it was my bridge out of the church, truly. I found the system. I got pulled up my profile and I remember reading the first, listening to the first audio and reading the first key and just feeling so completely seen and known.
Mm-hmm.
And like he was speaking stuff that like I had never verbalized, but had lived on the inside of me my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started interacting with that system a lot. And did the Venus sequence several times. I've done the activation and the pearl, and started doing readings recently. But for me, it's this beautiful alchemical, it's magic. Like it's pure magic. I heard him say in an interview one time that he actually received this transmission from Hermes Trismegistus, who is Mercury, who is, and they were the ones associated, and Merlin. There's like connections between Hermes and Merlin. So it's magic and alchemy, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really, there's this alchemical web in this transmission that once you start interacting with it, things will change in your life.
Mm.
And it shows you your shadows, but then in the shadow there's the gift, and then what he calls the cities. So it's this guided way to interact with the darkness inside you. And the Gene Keys approach is allow, accept, and embrace. So you're allowing and accepting this, and you're meeting it with love and compassion, which honestly took me a long time to learn how to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts this alchemical process. So I found my way to that. That blew my boxes open. And he's also really good at including like all the different wisdom teachings.
Yeah.
So that was a huge thing for me. Another really healing modality for me has been plant medicine.
Mm.
I I on the back end now, like I'm on a break.
Yeah.
Um, but after I found Gene Keys, and like I would say about 3 or 4 months later, my boxes were being expanded so much, and I've had again, vulnerable, but I have had an eating disorder for like I picked it up when I was 21, and I actually don't feel like I have it anymore, but I'm still learning how to I'm rebuilding my foundations. And now
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of that process of like, okay, we're wiping the slate clean and we're rebuilding the foundations. But I mentioned that to say this has been like the wound, the Chiron wound that has kept me searching for years and years and years and years.
Mm.
And again, it's that desire to fix myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was just playing itself out. So I found myself in plant medicine. I had opportunities in Los Angeles, and again, so grateful for that.
And when you
Um,
talk about plant medicine, what would you consider? What are some of the plant medications that you took?
my first ceremony was with sassafras, which is a heart opener,
Mm-hmm.
and psilocybin mushrooms. I've also I went to Peru and I sat with wachuma and ayahuasca. Anything else? Peyote.
Oh.
I think those are the main ones. I could be forgetting something. But also rape is, I mean, Heather has served that at our events. Like that's actually still part of my meditative practice. I think that's
Mm.
beautiful. But the medicine really, like, again, it just expanded me. It started loosening the edges. I started seeing the universe differently. It took me down this like wormhole of growth that truly beautiful and also truly challenging. Like I do want to put the warning sign here, like a lot of people go and they're like, oh, I'm just going to do this. It can be
Never,
very,
never do that. If you're watching, if you're listening, never do that. Never go without intentionally being called to do this kind of medication. I've done plant medicine myself. I've never done ayahuasca or half of the ones but I've done psilocybin. I have done ketamine, MDMA. I have also done what was the other one? I've done the Sonoran frog, which is the highest one that you can do. And never do it unintentionally because I've done it and I scared the living shit out of myself. And I had to do a lot of cleansing after. But when you do it with intentionality, when you do it in a safe environment, you can have the most profound soul awakening moments that, like you said, they do expand your mind. And for those of you who are listening, who are watching, I have to do an episode just basically on this experience for myself because I really want to talk about it. There's a lot of, especially if you grew up in the church, it's like, oh my God, never do drugs. You're going to go to hell. And the other thing is that they really make you fear that if you do it once, you're going to be addicted. And before you know it, you're going to be a heroin addict underneath the garage, or whatever, or underneath the, what is it called? The freeway overpass.
Yeah.
But these drugs are not addictive. And especially if you don't have addictive personality and you don't have addiction in your family, but they are not addictive drugs. They are one-time use that most of the time people do it once, twice, maybe even a third time, but they get it after the first or they get it after the second. It's almost like everything just falls into place. Everything clicks in and you're like, oh,
Well, and
now I know.
another warning I would put, because I was approaching it again from that desire to fix myself. So there was shame driving me.
Yeah.
And so I kept going back, not from an addictive standpoint, but from the I'm not fixed yet.
Mm,
But I finally like the medicine will work. Like it just will work. And I reached a point where it was like, yo, I saw like
yeah.
the thing that I believe plant medicine does is it gives you the opportunity to touch awareness and to touch consciousness and to touch the reality of who you are. And
Yeah. It
sometimes,
opens up your pineal gland.
Mhm.
Where it's, on a regular basis, our pineal gland is not being activated. We have all kinds of things in our food, fluoride in our toothpaste. Like there's so many different ways that the pineal gland is actually not being activated on a regular basis. A lot of us are not even meditating. We're nowhere near doing that stuff. So when you do this medicine, it does open up your pineal gland and all of a sudden you have this rush of just euphoria and you are just like broken open.
Remember who you were, who you are
Yes, at your core, which
at
is
your
the
core.
essence of all of
Exactly.
us. Yes.
Yeah. And then when you come back, then you have to integrate that. And
Mhm.
that integration I mean, that's where I'm at right now is like I'm in an extended period of integration. And it's beautiful because I'm watching the pieces of every single ceremony that I've been in. Like one just came to me yesterday. It was one of the first times I sat with psilocybin. And it was this, and this will lead me to the last healing modality I want to share. Which has probably been the most profound for me and will be kind of ironic based on my history. I was in like one of my very first plant medicine ceremonies and I was looking and looking and looking for myself. I was like asking the mushrooms, like, what am I here for? Such an ego-based question. What am I here for? What am I supposed to do? What is my purpose?
Yeah.
I like kept trying to find this thing. And I had several ceremonies with mushrooms where I was trying to do that. And I swear to God, every time it was like, they were like, no, you know, so, but I'm trying and I'm trying. And this dark witch energy, which was just representative of my mom. I don't believe that it is my mom. It just kept standing in my way and I
Mhm.
couldn't see myself. And so finally, the person that was leading, and I had seen where like this energy had been with me for lifetimes,
Yes.
watching this like timeline going like, wow. And so finally, I like peep out from under the thing and I'm like, I can't get rid of this woman. Like, can you please help me? So she helped me. And then I'm asking again, like, show me, show me, show me. And she started stroking my face with a rose.
Mm.
And the minute she did that, the medicine said, you are here to experience pleasure.
Mm.
That's it. That simple. Which, and I share that to say, like, again, to the point of like things falling into place when they're meant to, like, that's a revelation that I'm still integrating. Um, and most recently have been working with Tantra and sacred sexuality. Like,
Ooh.
yes, I highly recommend because what that's finally doing for me with the sexual trauma, with the food problem, the eating disorder, with everything that happened, I had so disassociated from my body. 2 years ago, I couldn't even feel pleasure.
Mm.
Like my coach, she would give me homework, like go home and eat strawberries slowly. And it was like so hard, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, because
Um,
when you're so ingrained in the church, sexual desire is the biggest no-no ever.
oh,
You know what I mean? It is like absolutely do not, you are, and then if you come from a church that is very much like, for example, my sister was an apostolic and the women had to wear long skirts and never cut their hair. And they had to wear, everything had to be covered up, like never, and even Mormonism, you can't even show your shoulders. So religion can play a huge part of like really dampening that sexual part of the female body, and making you feel like, and even from the beginning in the Bible, they make it seem like it's the woman's lust who made Adam eat an apple. And that's why all of us are sinners and we're forever going to be in this turmoil. It's always the woman who is the most evil, human being. And even now in society, I mean, look at Weinstein. He got off of his rape charges,
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter. Women's like opinion, their body, their sexuality is always lower to the man's sexuality.
Totally. And I mean, this is a whole soapbox.
I
Uh,
know. We can talk for hours on this
yeah,
subject.
because it's so true. I mean, you mentioned the creation myth, which I, again, like now I'm like, somebody wrote that because they had an agenda.
Yes.
Because the snake was seen as being the tempter, the devil. When it, like, you go way, way back to the goddess traditions, Egyptian, Mayan, the snake is sexual energy. It's Kundalini. It's
Hmm.
like, and this Kundalini is our power source. It sits at the base of our spine, and it is the thing that gives us power, especially as women, because our sexuality is tied to our creativity. We are living reflections. And I have so much honor and respect for men. I actually believe that we both
Well,
hold the
we
masculine
need
and
both.
the feminine, right? We
Yes.
both hold the masculine and the feminine. So I'm not saying this to the degradation of the other. I'm just recognizing we are an absolute reflection of the goddess. We are an
Hmm.
absolute reflection of whoever, whatever it is that birthed this world and this cosmos, because we can bring a living being through our body. We
Hmm.
also can bring ideas and projects and creativity and businesses and, whatever. But we have this, I've heard it talked about as the Stargate Enterprise between your legs. Like,
That's a
we
good way
have
of
this,
saying it.
right? We have this thing, this channel. And for whatever reason, I don't know who or what decided to start patriarchy. I would love to
Yeah.
find out, but they decided that that was a threat. And so, of course, you would make the symbol of sexuality the devil in the garden that tempted
Hmm.
Eve to eat the apple, which actually has like correlations to Persephone and the pomegranate seeds that she ate down when she went into the underworld.
Mm.
There's so much hidden when you really look back at our myths and the time when they started changing. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Kind of like reveal all of this, because even in Israel, like even in Jewish culture, way, way back in the day, they worshiped the goddess.
Yeah.
Till the priests of Yahweh started coming in and kicking the goddess out of the temples and burning their shrines. And so it wasn't until like 1500 BC-ish that the goddess was actually thrown out.
Yeah.
But until that point, she was revered as creation. She was revered as she created the world
Hmm.
in all the different ancient myths. So yeah, there is this thing about separating us from our sexual energy. And I just became, as the plant medicine was like
Yeah.
expanding, Gene Keys is bringing, I mean, that actually has some very tantric notes in it. And all of my gene key, like 3 of my primary gene keys are all related to Tantra.
Yeah. And it's like, if you think about it, like how you said earlier, you don't trust yourself because you're not connected to your body. And how
Right.
can we connect to our body if we're not touching ourselves, if we're not exploring ourselves, if we're not in tune with what makes us feel good? You know what I mean? And a lot of us who've experienced sexual abuse or have in some way been sexually assaulted, then you almost hate your body because it
100%.
created that situation. Nobody ever blames the abuser. Like, I just watched this whole documentary of this woman who got abused, and she's like telling her mom, and her mom's like, yeah, I got abused, but don't talk about it. Just forget about it. Like, just let it go. And then she goes and talks to the grandma. The grandma has also been abused. And she's like, yeah, I was abused by 4 guys, but let's just not talk about it, because then otherwise it'll eat you up. Just like, forget about it. Let's not talk about it. And it's just like this conversation from generation to generation that we don't have, and we disassociate ourselves from our body and disassociate ourselves consciously of who we are as a human being. And then you're just passing on the trauma. We're passing on generational trauma, generational pain, and you're teaching your child how to disassociate and not trust themselves, not have gut reactions. And so then
Exactly.
therefore they become victims of the same abuse.
Yeah.
So
Because
I
it's
mean,
your,
it
it
all
is,
it's all connected.
it's all connected, and it is your intuition that tells you, like, and this is what I'm in the process of now, even, is just reconnecting to that, like, oh, what does my body want to eat? Oh,
Mhm.
like, what is, like, just listening. And that those tantric modalities, I mean, some of it is self-pleasure, some of it is, well, most of it involves self-pleasure, but great, because you're
Yeah.
awakening that kundalini, but then also some
Yes.
of it has to do with breath work and conscious, there's meditation
Yeah. But just
and
like you said earlier, even just eating a strawberry slowly. You know
mhm,
what I mean? I mean, you could be telling,
awakening your senses.
yeah, but if you're like a kid who grew up in this kind of, environment, you like, for example, eating one of those big pops. Remember those big popsicles that you
Mm.
would get? Like, I remember my mom saying, don't eat that in a way that's sexual in front of anybody. I'm fucking 8 years
It's a
old.
popsicle.
How the hell do I know about what I'm doing? You know what I mean? Like, and it was
Ah,
always like, don't do this because you're going to bring on this type of behavior. I'm eight
well,
years
and
old.
what's underneath that is the
Yeah.
belief that sexuality is somehow wrong.
Yes. And
And
again,
this
it's like,
under,
I have to change my behavior, what I'm wearing, so that the man doesn't feel tempted to
yeah.
do things to me. And that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm just saying, you know what I mean? So you create all these little nuances about your
And that
body.
stacks, and you learn, you
Yeah.
hide,
You play
right?
small and you hide,
Play
and
small.
you wear baggy clothes, and you gain the weight, and you don't want to show your body, and you don't want to ever express your sexual desires, and you just kind of like, I'll just do what I have to do to make
Yeah.
them happy and not worry about what makes me happy.
Mhm. Yeah. And I will, gosh, I'm just sharing all the things now. I will
It's all
say,
connected. This is why I'm so happy we're having this conversation. The moment I met this woman, I'm telling you, this is how we talked. We were just like one conversation about another conversation, crying and holding each other, that we resonated so well with. I mean, my past is nothing compared. Yours, narcissistic abuse, was a lot higher than my mom's, even though my mom was pretty abusive. But it's just so much how we were all looking to feel seen, loved, wanted. We want our stories to be validated. We want to be heard. And we want to know, like, how can we get closer and closer to the core of who we truly are before the abuse began? And
yeah,
so, like I tell all of my clients, and I've said on this podcast many a times, there are a multitude of healing modalities, and
yeah,
every modality is going to be something that I believe you should try. If it feels good, if it makes you feel amazing, it makes you feel connected to the core of who, try it, keep doing it, share it, do. But if it doesn't, then try something else and just
yeah.
keep trying until you get to the place where you're like, I get it. And you have this a beautiful aha soul awakening moment where you're like, I get it. There was nothing wrong with me to begin with.
Yeah.
There's nothing to fix.
Yes.
I am who I am. And like you said earlier, that expansive point in your life where or that moment where you're like, it's all part of the story. It's
Mhm.
all part of it. And you don't hate the things that happened to you in the past. You almost are thankful
I
because it's all
actually
part
am.
of your journey?
I think those of us who have gone through trauma have this gift, in a way, of, we've so deeply experienced what it is to be connected from our divinity And that's really what we're trying to come home to, is like, I want
Yes.
to come home to knowing that I am God in flesh, because we all are, you know, and that's where I've come to after leaving the church. It's like, oh, wait a second. They had me looking in the sky for all these years, but like it's actually inside me, you know,
Yeah.
because I like the consciousness that created all of this lives on the inside of me and is expressing itself through me. And the journey to come back to that, it may sound twisted, but I actually think those of us who have been through trauma, we have this beautiful gift of having so deeply experienced the disconnection that
Hmm.
we really can serve as a bridge for people, because
Yeah.
once we find our way back to this other side of the bridge, it's like, oh baby, I totally understand where you are and I can help you get over here. Like
Yes.
that's how we evolve as a species. And you know, this may be controversial, but I believe, for myself at least, I'll say, I truly believe I chose this.
Mm,
I believe that my soul knew exactly what she was signing up for. I've actually had the divine give me a memory of that,
mm,
where like I remember being up in the cosmos and God showing me, God, whoever, showing me like this whole reel of my life. And it was heavy,
yeah.
but there was a purpose to it. And I remember saying yes. And I would never take that back.
Yeah. I love that. I've watched so many near-death experiences that I truly believe that we all sign the soul contract and say, yeah, I'm down for it.
Mhm.
I always talk about how, did you watch the Barbie movie?
I did, yes.
Okay, so you remember in the Barbie movie, she's like, I want to be a real human. And so she's like, put your hands in mine. And she kind of gives her like, just some snippets of like how beautiful it is to be a human. And I'm like, that's probably what happened. I was up in heaven, just having a great time with all my amazing friends, just having an amazing time. And then all of a sudden I was like, I want to be a human. And they just show me like the great parts of my life and they don't show me any of the bad parts. And I'm like, sign me up.
Yeah,
And here
totally.
I am.
Well,
But
to be human is to sign up for amnesia. Like
yes.
we come in to forget,
Yes,
you know?
absolutely.
And then,
You come in completely like a blank slate. That's why I feel like kids are crying when they're like, "Wait a minute, what am I doing here? Why am I naked?
they still
What's all this
remember.
goo around me?"
They're that fresh. They still remember. Like Richard Rudd actually talks about this. Like you're so fresh from the divine that that is actually still, there's a reason that kids' eyes don't focus. Babies' eyes don't focus for the first amount of time, because they're actually like they're still seeing all the other realms that we don't see.
Yeah.
So like, and
That's why they
then
have imaginary friends.
yeah, exactly.
Yes. Oh my gosh. We could go in a whole nother conversation about all that spirituality stuff because I so deeply have been down this rabbit hole myself. And I call myself a seeker. I think
Yeah.
I will never know all of the answers until I get to the other side. And after I left the church, I'm no longer afraid of dying. I'm no longer afraid of like what's going to happen because I know that I am unconditionally loved. And I know that there's nothing I can do to lose that love because and we as humans we can't fathom that because we have conditions to our love, but source, God, the divine, spirit, the universe, the infinite intelligence, call it whatever you want, because I don't think you could label something that's the alpha and the omega, all that is and all
Right.
that ever was, and it's got unconditional love for us.
Yeah.
And as much as I've gone down near death experience rabbit hole, you
Uh-huh.
know every person that I've listened to says we can't even begin to fathom or experience or imagine the love that's on the other side. We
Yeah.
can't. So for me, that is just, I can't wait. I'm excited. I'm excited to go to the other side. I'm
Exactly.
excited,
Nothing to
and
be
obviously
afraid
like
of.
here on this side, I feel like the cosmic joke is we'll never really know the answers. You can't. I've heard on one guy who was being interviewed who died and came back. He said, just think of the ocean as the knowledge of all that is and all that ever was. And your brain is literally a thimble.
Mm,
So he's like, when I went over there, I like knew it all and knew what, and I was just like, I know everything. And I was like, in my mind, he's like, as I'm there on the other side, I'm like, I gotta remember this. I gotta remember this. But then when came back, he was like, I couldn't remember half of it. I couldn't remember even an ounce of it. I can't even. verbally express what I saw on the other side because there are no words to describe the colors and the sounds and the feeling. It's just like my brain is a thimble, and everything that I was so exposed to on the other side, I can't even bring it back because my brain would explode. Like it just would explode. So anyways, I am so grateful for this time with you. Seriously, I'm so thankful. It sucks that she moved to Hawaii though. I was like, yes, we're going to be BFFs. We're going to see each other more. And then she's like, I'm moving to Hawaii. And I'm like, for the love of God.
Come visit me.
I know. I do love Hawaii.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we wrap up this episode, what would be your nugget of wisdom for anyone who is watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple and is going through a narcissistic relationship, either with a parent or a loved one, and they want to get out?
Can I give you 2 real quick?
Sure, absolutely. The more
'Cause
the
there's
nuggets, the better.
There's some, and maybe they tie together. The first, because there's something you said earlier that I just was like, I gotta say this. My first response would be, if you're in that relationship and you want to get out, first of all, congratulations, because you've woken up, and that's the biggest part. I think the golden nugget of wisdom that I have learned over the last 10 years, and we've mentioned it actually quite a few times, is that there is nothing to fix. And the faster you, like, if you can just plant tattoo it on your forehead, whatever you have to do, like, I am not a problem to solve, because that has been probably the driving energy for most of my life. But I did finally come to this point where it's like, wow, I'm actually going to stop trying to fix myself, and I'm just going to start learning about myself. I'm just going to start reconnecting to myself. I'm just going to start listening to myself. And so don't go through the 10 years. Take my lesson.
Yes.
Just stop the fixing and make your highest devotion. Devote yourself to this like you would if you were in the church, or like you would if, you were worshiping some goddess somewhere. Devote yourself to coming home to yourself and truly learning all about you, because you're a miracle.
I love it. Oh,
okay. My second tidbit would be what you said about the cosmic joke. And this kind of comes back to the sacred sexuality. The cosmic joke is also that all of our connection to the divine is hidden in our kundalini. It's hidden in our root. So the more you can come home to, again, we look at the systems of control in our world, and there's no accident that we've been so disconnected, not just women, men too, so incredibly disconnected from our sexuality. And that is our channel to the divine. So the quicker you can open that up in your body, like make that a thing.
yes.
Because if they can cut this off by cutting us off from here, then they've got us. But if we have a one-to-one connection, somebody comes up to you and tells you something that's not true, and you know it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, how can my audience find you?
I am on Instagram as Kyra.Finley.creates. And I also have just recently started a Substack, but you can find that through my Instagram. I have like a link tree. I'm really building a community there. It's called The Golden Thread, and diving into all sorts of different topics as far as spirituality, and really like where we're headed as a species. I'm deeply curious about that. Also, I do gene key readings. I also do astrology readings, and those are both, we didn't even talk about astrology, but those have both been incredibly healing modalities for me as far as understanding my internal makeup. And I like to say gene keys is like how you alchemize, and then your astrology is like the memo that your soul left you of like, hey, this is why you came. So again, they can find that on my Instagram, but would be happy to serve in that way too.
And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe. And for those of you who are listening on Spotify and Apple, please leave a review. Make sure you find her, because I personally had a Gene Keys reading with her, and it was mind-blowing. So I highly recommend doing one with her. Thank you again for being on the podcast. It has been an absolute honor. Thank you again for listening to Journey of a Fearless Female. I'm your host, Paola Rosser. If you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual mentor, you can book a free discovery call with me at www.fearlessfemale.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at fearlessfemale_coach, subscribe to my YouTube channel at fearlessfemale, or find me on TikTok. I'm under at paola.rosser. And if you love this episode, make sure you hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a review. I read every single review, and I truly appreciate the time you spend writing it.